Good afternoon and welcome to Cold Chain Insights, the podcast that focuses everything temperature-controlled logistics for the pharmaceutical industry. My name's Thomas Hunt, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by Derek Glover, who's currently the Senior Manager of Clinical Supply and Logistics at Aveo Oncology. Derek, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me today, Thomas. Appreciate it.
A pleasure. I think a good place to start always is if maybe you give a brief background to your career so far, and then obviously a little bit of context to your current role there at Aveo.
Sure, that sounds good. So I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for 24 years. Started in a small biotech inside San Diego, California, working in primarily manufacturing logistics. So moving materials from one manufacturing facility to another. From that point forward, continue to grow my career in the manufacturing side of things, all in biologics for the most part, and then started working in some contract manufacturing as well. Over the last 5 years, I've been involved in the COVID-19 pandemic vaccine process, as well over the last 3 years. I've been here at Aveo Oncology, building out the supply chain group, primarily around logistics and building out an inventory program too for the company.
Great, perfect. Okay, so I mean, you've worked in global logistics and now clinical supply. What differences have you seen between them both in your career?
I think there's a lot of similarities between both. Really, at the end of the day, I think clinical supply logistics really is a wide open range of activity that's going on. Not only supplying clinical supply materials to the clinics throughout the world globally, but then on the global logistics side, we're moving material to our distributors to get to that final mile for use by the patient. I think both are rewarding in their ways, and there's a lot of different opportunities in how you get involved in both sides of the business. But I think for me, it's been a great ride in the current scope that we're in. And right now we're working through many clinical trials and supporting our clients, our customers throughout the world.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned in your introduction there, obviously you're involved with COVID, which is always a really interesting topic to dive into. So if it's okay, I'll just ask a question on that. But what I always like to understand is what were the first 2 or 3 months like when COVID hit? We all went through that pandemic. And what was it like on the ground in terms of your sort of operational role there?
Sure. Yeah. So I worked for a company that was just starting out, right? So their main product was going to be this COVID vaccine. And the most interesting part is we were building the system from the ground up. We had to pick distributors. We had to pick vendors. We had to pick how we're going to move materials. We're going to have to validate all of it being done in a constricted time frame, right, to be able to support anybody that needed the vaccine through the pandemic and on a global scale. Then you put on top of all of it that you need to be able to distribute and travel and get to places where you need to set up these distribution hubs during a pandemic. So it was very interesting as we were going through that time to be able to get that product, to be able to, one, get it produced, two, get it to our different vendors to be able to package and process it forward, and then eventually get it to our distributors. It was rewarding in the fact that the amount of experience that you got from that time period was so vast because the timeline was so constricted. I think at the end of the day, it was certainly a lesson of what we can do when we're really pushed to the limit.
Yeah. What were the big learnings you took from that, and what would you do differently should it happen again?
Oh, that's a great question. I think being open-minded. I think at the end of the day, our industry typically goes with, this is how we've always done it. There's a pretty good road book to be able to get product to market, specifically in the logistics side of the world, and how we validate packaging and what we do. COVID allowed us to be able to work outside of those parameters a little bit. It gave us that freedom to be able to do it. And so I think, bringing that thought process into my current role and being able to challenge that status quo a little bit more, it has been something that was a real big takeaway from that experience. We were in the current role that I'm in now is we're working through trying to build that same structure. We're a small box, and we're working through building a similar structure with limited resources. So I think having that experience, my previous employer, is really helping in the current role.
Yeah, that was an amazing time for all of us, I think, COVID. And I think a lot of lessons have come from a lot of the people we've spoken to. It's what you, I suppose, take away from it, isn't it, in the aftermath of that, and what it changes things going forward and how you might plan things differently. But There's some good learnings there for sure. At Logipharma in Boston in 2025, I think you spoke around scaling smart for biotech, emerging pharma innovators. And I was quite interested to ask, when you say scaling smart, what does that mean in reality? And what does it look like in real operations day to day?
Sure. Yeah. I think, at the end of the day, not all pharmaceutical companies are built the same, right? So all pharmaceuticals have different objectives that they're looking to compete with, but also the dollars that are available to every company is very different. So in the current role that I'm in today, we're a small biotech company. We have one commercial product on the market and working through several different clinical trials. Our opportunity to scale here is very limited, right? We have to be able to stay within those parameters that have been set for us to be able to build this logistics team that we're putting in place. So taking a look at what opportunities are out there, what programs are available for us, how do we put in certain transportation management systems that can work for us for the time being while we're going through this period of growth, but then also making sure that it fits within that budget that we have. At the end of the day, everything that we do, we need to stay compliant, right? We have ultimately a compliance that we need to hold because of the FDA or other agencies. But then we also need to make sure that our product is moving appropriately to be safe for our patients. So I think when you have those two things in mind, you're trying to work with what you have to be able to move it effectively and ensure that the material and the product that we're providing for our clients arrives in the right temperature, right packaging, and the right conditions every time.
Yeah. And what some of the what are some of the big mistakes that you're trying to avoid as a small biotech, small budget, as you've just explained, when you're trying to scale? Where do you see the pitfalls? Because you're kind of living it, aren't you, in your current role?
Yeah, I think that some of the pitfalls, honestly, are you're talking to many different companies to be able to put systems in place, and everybody has the right solution, right? And it's right out of the box. It's going to do everything you want. It's going to look great on paper, and it's really looking at those systems and making sure that's what you need at the time, right? It might be real easy to have that scope creep to look at, oh man, this would be great to have in 5 to 10 years. But in 5 to 10 years, the whole system could change. So you need to look at what you need now and what's needed to be efficient at what you're doing now. So, we looked at a couple different programs to be able to not only manage our inventory, but as well as our logistics, picking the right vendors to be able to support us through cold chain packaging, as well as transportation, and really working with them closely so that they can meet our needs for now. And those relationships are just so important. And that's something that we continue to build as we are moving forward on the goals that we have here.
Yeah. And if you're trying to assess a partner, like a packaging partner, with the remit you've got internally and the project you're working on, what are you looking for? What are the parameters you're looking to set for them in terms of deliverables for a company like yours?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now we're utilizing a partner that is providing packaging for us, right? So they are supplying packaging, monitors, and as well as our transportation, doing that white glove service for us, which is really valuable for the time that we're in right now because we're very limited on people as well as time and money. So, having a partner like that can help us bridge those gaps around those three main areas is really important. But also making sure that they are a good partner with us when we're asking for data to support why we're utilizing certain packaging, and to be able to support us with validation protocols or validation documents is great, as well as route risk assessments, making sure that our materials are routing appropriately and going through the right ports or going through the right routing every time. Those are all really important for us, and picking that right vendor really provides us that sense of ease so that we know that every time our product is moving the way it should.
Yeah. And I think that obviously as supply chains grow, especially with an emerging or a growth business like yours, I presume it gets messy and complicated, especially around the temperature controlled element, which you're describing. And when that happens in your experience, what tends to break first? Is it the storage or packaging, transport? Which is the area where you're sort of most concerned about?
It's a good question. I think it's a lot of it at this point. Packaging is so robust. We don't really have a whole lot of issues with packaging. A lot of it is people. Where did the monitor go in the box? Did it get set appropriately per our procedures where we need that monitor to be set? Did they stop the monitor on time? Did they start the monitor on time? Did they precondition things? it really comes down to the people. And so it's important that not only do the 3PLs that we're utilizing have procedures around what they're doing, but we also have those same procedures that mimic what we're asking them to do, so that everyone is on the same page on what's needed, so that we don't have those breakdowns. In this business, still at the end of the day, there's a lot of people, right? There's, between trucks and planes and trains and automobiles, you got it all. You got it all. And so still our main risk factor is people. But really what we try to do is mitigate that risk the most by having the right procedures in place so that it can be replicable every time.
Yeah. Is there a specific procedure that really helps with that people piece? Because it's something that comes up time and time again, is that people's often the hardest part to manage, and it's where a lot of the risk lies. As you say, packaging tends to be very robust, and forwarders tend to be very good now in terms of their routes and planning, etc. So is there a key thing that you've learned over the years that really helps with the people part, or is it just around SOPs and tighten those up?
Well, I think a lot of it really is that work up front. So when you start working with a particular vendor, so you're talking about MSAs or SOWs and building those contracts out appropriately, that then can cascade those procedures downwards, right? So that, if you will, it's that guidebook, those MSAs and SOWs is that guidebook to be able to really make the intentions well known on what we're trying to do. So then both companies are on the same page. We're both speaking the same language. We both understand what our needs are, and it becomes a partnership, not just transactional. And I can't stress that enough. Having that partnership is so important because it makes the relationship between a manufacturer like ourselves and a 3PL so clear. And you can make a phone call, you can send a text, you can send an email, and because of that partnership that you've grown, that you get what you need as soon as you need it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So would you recommend, because I've heard this quite a few times in terms of that was exactly what you've described. Say you take a 3PL, would you be giving almost all of your business to one 3PL and jumping fully into them in terms of partnership rather than spreading it across a number of providers? Or how would you recommend that split of the business that you have to give out is done?
Sure. No, that's a great question. Obviously, we're going to have a primary carrier, right? So we're going to have someone that we've really worked real hard on a partnership with. In the case of today, that's where we're at. We have a primary carrier that we've built over the years, a great partnership that they continue to support us in everywhere we need. But it would be a disservice to ourselves to not have a secondary provider, right? In the world that we live in today, you need to have options, and because you're always thinking about risk and how to mitigate. So obviously, we have a secondary option that carries the same packaging that we utilize with our primary carrier, but then we also create that same partnership with the secondary carrier and be real clear that, listen, you're our secondary carrier. These are the lanes that we would like to probably use with you to give them those business opportunities. But I think it's just trying to be upfront and transparent to those carriers on what we need them for.
Yeah, no, interesting. Yeah, that's good. At Logipharma, you talked about mitigating compliance risk, cold chain storage, and IoT, which is a topic I really like getting into. But when you say compliance risk in cold storage, what are the top 3 risks you actually mean and you're trying to overcome there?
One of it's temperature monitoring, real-time temperature monitoring, understanding how our product is what temperature it's currently sitting at. The other thing is making sure that our product is safe, making sure that there's limited access to where our material is at. In the world we live in today, the global supply chain that we're in today, our product could be sitting anywhere in the world. So knowing that we've worked with our partners, ensuring that our product is in a safe, cold environment, or the environment that we require, is really important to us. And I think the other piece to it is just ensuring that it's compliant, GMP compliant, right? So, it's a real important piece for us, so that if you have that GMP compliance, we can rely on you when we need you in any kind of regulatory audit. If we need documentation, sound documentation, that we can rely on that vendor to be able to support it. So I think those 3 pieces to me are real important. I mean, I think the list can go on various different levels, but those are the 3 that I'm constantly thinking about, just for the safety of our own products.
Okay, and then when you say you want to keep, make sure it's secure in cold storage, which makes complete sense. How much are you leaning on? Obviously, you've mentioned IoT and monitoring there. Are they as one? You're using your IoT and monitoring to track that, or is that an upfront piece you're putting into place first with your partner to make sure they have the infrastructure and everything placed? to fulfill that need?
Yeah, so we're kind of doing both. So we make sure that our partner does have that infrastructure in place as part of our general quality audits, right? So for our providers that are storing material, they go through regular audits around their capabilities, their risk mitigation factors. But then also, yeah, really diving into their temperature monitoring. What are their alert limits? How do they get those alerts? What's the response timeframes? All those are part of that discussion as we
Hmm.
start building those contracts with those providers.
And do you set the alert limits with your provider, or how involved are you on those alert limits and the sort of the differences you can have? Or
So, yeah, no, that's a great question. I think a lot of times we are looking at what the capabilities are for our material within our specification, right? So our specification for sure drives a lot of those discussions. Fortunately, our products are 2 to 8 and -80, so we're in a pretty good range in that most companies are using similar storage and shipping
mm,
capabilities. So I think for the most part, we are very well aligned with our vendors on what their limits are. At
hmm
times, they might allow a limit plus or minus 10, let's say, for example. So we might need to discuss internally whether we need to buy a freezer or need to put a cold room in place that if our limits are tighter.
mm.
For the
Any
most
chance
part, we've been
is that 10%? Is that 10% you're talking about, or 10 degrees?
10 degrees, sorry, 5 to 10
Right. Okay.
degrees difference, right?
Wow.
So depending on what we're moving and what our specification is, we
Hmm.
might only have allowable excursions of 5 degrees outside of that
Wow.
limit, right? And our vendors might have 10 to 15 depending on what their limits are. So depending on what our spec says and what our material requires, we will certainly look at options at buying a freezer and putting it in place out of a facility or a cold space if we have to stay tighter within a certain range.
Okay. And is there a common theme? So if you want sites to have fewer excursions, what's the first thing that you try and fix or look at? The top 3 or 4 things you tend to dive into first?
So if there is an excursion of some type, obviously we want to make sure the safety of the material is first and utmost of our priority. So we want that material moved to another chamber if possible, or moved into another shipping container, however the material is being managed. Secondary, then we're going to look at where that failure mode was. We're going to try to see, was it a monitor within that cold storage that was potentially wrong? Was it not validated appropriately? Taking a look at the validation of the actual container or the storage unit. And then the other piece to it is we're going to see, what was their response time. So, for example, if it was a cold chain chamber and they lost power, will the backup units or the backup power kick on appropriately? Did it not do that? Was there a delay? Was there an issue there? Is something else that we'll be looking at. Now, if it's a shipping container, it's very different. If it's in transit, there might be not something that we can't do, right? So if it's in the belly of a plane, we see that there's something going wrong with the temperature. We won't be able to get it until it gets off that plane at the next touch point for our vendor. So we would immediately be in contact with our vendor and have them switch containers at their nearest availability. But depending on where it is in flight, where it's in transit, we might not be able to do that for a little bit longer. And it goes to why we do so much work on our validation, on our shipping side of things, so that we have an understanding of how the containers are going to work real time. But then the
Hmm.
other piece to it is really understanding what our limits are for our material. What can the material withstand in plus or minus degree temperatures, so that the material still is in good condition. The efficacy of the material is still good.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And how do you stop sort of temperature logger fatigue alerts, too many alerts, which is often a problem, isn't it, in terms of just getting too much data through? Are you very tight in terms of the parameters you're setting and what you want to see in terms of alerts and information? Because it can be overload, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of data creep there too, right? So, the beauty of the world that we live in today, there's an absolute crazy amount of data. We have so
Mm.
much data that we can see, but then that also can create issues for us too, right? Now we have too much data, so now we're questioning everything. So again, it goes back to our specification for material. What can the material withstand? What have we tested? but then also building procedures around what are nuisance alarms potentially, and what are real alarms, and really setting our limits appropriately, right? And so that's what's so important about shipping validation, is really seeing that real time data while we validate our shippers to see what kind of trends we're seeing in the real world, so we can set our limits appropriately.
Yeah. So you're using real-time monitoring, is that correct?
Currently, we use a variety of different monitoring. One monitor we are utilizing is a real-time monitor, so we can see what the shipper is doing, the environment around it. So that's an
Yep.
exterior monitor that we're utilizing. The interior monitor is not real-time, so that's something that we won't see until it gets to the actual end of the line. The nice piece around the real-time monitoring for the exterior monitors, we can see what change to the environment is going on. So, for example, if it is traversing across the Middle East and it drops into Dubai and it's crazy, crazy warm, like it would be in Dubai, we would have an understanding of where that material needs to go into a storage container until it gets into its next flight. In my vaccine world, we saw stops like that, where we were moving from India to the EU, and we had to make a stop somewhere. And so we could see what the exterior environment was doing and contact our vendor and say, okay, we need you to move this into a cold storage to prevent the container from heating up too much. So that real-time monitoring is very valuable when it's in transit, for sure.
Yeah, I've seen sort of customers with real-time monitoring. Some of them are very big on it. And obviously, you've seen it as well, where they're actually setting their parameters, and they can see the risk level increasing as it hits a certain area or the tarmac, and they know how long it has left. And for example, at that temperature before the packaging might fail, which is more in the sort of general pharma logistics world, I know. But it's very useful, because then they can obviously act before something happens and there's an alarm, and then obviously it goes into quarantine and the other problems that come with that. So yeah, there's a huge amount going on there, I think, in that world.
Yeah, I mean, we had an experience where one of our containers, it was a palletized shipper that was moving the material at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. So the vendor, it was going to have a long layover. So the vendor moved it into 2 to 8 storage. Well, we could see that with the real-time monitor, and we called our vendor and said, you need to move it out of the 2 to 8. It needs to go in controlled temperature, because the way the unit was validated, it would freeze the material inside if it stayed in a 2 to 8 storage. So we were able to mitigate that risk in that real time world. So yeah, I think the value there is extremely.
Yeah, nice. And I also read that you have spoken before at BSMA around the final mile, which is obviously very much in the world that you live in. Could you just sort of define what the final mile is for cold chain in your perspective, and why it's so difficult to manage and why it fails so often?
Yeah, I think, the final mile for me in my current role is a little different than what it typically would be considered, right? So in my current role, our final mile is getting it to our distributor. But in most cases, the final mile is really getting it to the patient. And as you can see in the world that as it's changing today, specifically, you watch a TV program and you see every 5 minutes another GLP-1 device that's getting released out for people to be able to utilize, all in these medical devices that are going straight to the patient. So that final mile from the distributor to the patient is really critical, so that the patient knows that whatever they're injecting with an auto injector is good, right? They need to know that the material was stayed within the cold range that's required, that whatever they're injecting is going to the efficacy of the material is still going to be good, and that it's safe for them. So that final mile is so critical, because patients aren't going to know, right? They don't understand the criticality of how that material is moved. They just think of it as an Amazon box. It arrived on their porch. Now they're going to open it up and use the medicine that they need. And as the world shifts, as we go into this personalized medicine, it's going to continue to be something that our world, pharmaceutical manufacturer world, is going to have to focus on. And so, yeah, I think that final mile is making sure that our patients know that the material that they're going to use when it arrives at their doorstep is still good.
So do you currently have a process where you send it into a distributor, do you, or a wholesaler, and they're managing that last final mile? And how do you manage that mile in terms of its performance. Are you putting that ownership onto them, or is it something you're still very actively involved in?
So in my current role, once we get it to our distributor is managing that final mile.
Okay.
But again, it goes back to what we spoke about a bit ago, is those relationships with our partners and making sure that that what they are doing is compliant, right? And is exactly what we need for our patient. Obviously, that's our number one priority. Mm-hmm. So having those discussions with our vendors and ensuring that our contracts are in place and their procedures are in place to ensure that our material is moving the way we need it to move within our specification is so critical. So we really rely heavily on those distributors for our material.
Are there things that the clinics and hospitals could do to make the process smooth or remove risk?
Yeah, I think there's opportunities. There's obviously the world is changing and how we get real-time data. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Mm-hmm. I think the issue from what I can see from a hospital utilization perspective is they're getting constricted from a budget perspective as well, right? So the hospitals are getting more and more constricted, and so they're less they're looking at ways of where they can save money instead of spending money. I think there's opportunities where we can see that the material arrives at a hospital, and when it gets put in cold storage, and notification processes that can be automatic. Not all hospitals have that capability, right? Or the budget to put that in. Mm-mm. So I think that's something that we, as an industry could look at potentially. How do we make this be more budget conscious? Because at the end of the day, like I said before, it's all about the patient. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that our material is arriving at those last stops appropriately. And so what can we do as an industry to be able to make these opportunities be budget conscious as well as be robust enough for everyone that's involved in that supply chain?
Yeah. And with such a reliance on that final mile partner, as you've described, is so critical for what you're delivering and the safety of the product being sent into the patient. What are, say, the three non-negotiables that you would look from a partner in that space? Just give us a bit of insight.
Good question. So I think, for me, when we're working with a partner like that, one of the non-negotiables is just transparency, right? I think we're trusting that the partner is doing what we require for mm-hmm. our material. And so having that transparency, whether it's going to be positive or negative, having that transparency is so important for us. Because if it's a negative experience, if something happened in transit, we can work with them to be able to make the process more robust and be able to make sure that, our process is repeatable and robust. So having that transparency is really important. I think the other piece to it is ensuring that we're doing it the most efficient, doing things the most efficient way possible. I think, we can tend to look at the budget and look at how we're moving materials and say, okay, well, we can put our material on this flight, which will be cheaper than putting it on a direct flight. So we could put it on a flight and then truck it potentially to its final destination. But is that best for our product? Is that too many touch points now? Really taking a look at our routing and making sure that our routing is consistent every time. But also, obviously we're trying to be budget conscious, but we want to make sure that our material is also safe and in transit. And I think the last thing I can think of is just ensuring that, I guess it kind of ties into the first around transparency, but that the people that are doing the work are trained appropriately and the procedures are robust, right? So when you have all three of those things, I think, the lack or the ability to mess something up is diminished. I think we have an opportunity there where our material should be able to move freely in those routings well. And if there is an issue, it's probably it's a one-off, and we're not going to see that happen very often.
Yeah. No, great. Okay. And just looking into the future, what over the next 3 years, where will the biggest challenges happen for you in your space, do you think, with your specific area that you're covering?
I think, as you're seeing what I mentioned earlier around GLP-1s and the medical device industry and auto injecting and going straight to patient, I think is going to continue to evolve and change. I think that is what the world wants. They don't want to go to clinic if they don't have to. They don't want to leave their home. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at how we do a lot of our shopping nowadays, right? We're clicking online and buying things and having it delivered straight to our doorstep. So it would be silly of us not to think that people are going to want the same for any kind of care that they need, right? So I
Mm.
think that is going to change dramatically, which then is really going to be an impact on our cold chain. We see capacities continue to be tight in air for moving materials. So, we're sharing space with a lot of other products that are moving around the world. How do we make sure that our products get priority in that world, and continues to move safely throughout the supply chain? And then again, it goes back down to that final mile. How do we ensure that the patient knows when it arrives at their doorstep that the
Mm.
material is good to be used? So it's questions that I constantly are thinking about, because I know that's the world. That's where it's going to eventually go. That personalized healthcare.
Hmm.
We see glimpses of it now, but I think it's going to continue to grow.
Yeah. How far away do you think we are from that point? In because I totally agree with what you've just said. And do you think that we're a few years away from that being a quite a primary way of people receiving medicines, or do you think it's further than that?
I think we're probably somewhere between 5 and 10 years away. I think that the at the end of the day, cancer therapies and what we do today with that's going to shift a bit, but we're going to have to figure out how that works in a home environment. Maybe you still need a nurse to come and utilize or to provide that medicine to a patient, but it goes directly to their home, or maybe they can auto inject themselves depending on the dosing. I think there's a lot of questions around how that will work from a compliance standpoint as well. Is the
Hmm.
right person getting the right medicine? How do you ensure that happens? Is another question. So I think we're headed that way, but I still think there's still a lot of questions that need to be answered before we get there. I think we're probably somewhere between 5 or 10 years away from that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And then you mentioned capacity issues there, and obviously more medicines are needing to be moved by temperature control every year, and it's an ever growing issue. Where do you see the problem in a couple of years in terms of capacity? Where will it break first for the industry and major lanes?
I think, my experience, Europe to the US, right? There's a lot of freight that's moving between Europe and the US. I think that capacity is still constricted. I think that, we're at least what I'm seeing is potentially getting bumped for other products that are paying more money to get on that plane.
Hmm.
Whether it's consumables for, whether it's a distributor for Amazon or something like that, we're getting potentially bumped. I think there's still a delay in plane manufacturing too, right? So there's a lot of old planes still moving freight across back and forth. So I think some companies are still waiting for those planes to be delivered so they can increase their capacity for freight. So, and then I have also capacity constraints on hazardous material. I move material with dry ice. So making
Right.
sure that I can get on a plane that still has capacity to be able to hold it
Mm.
within IATA guidelines. So I think the capacity is certainly difficult. It's not what COVID was, but
Yeah.
it's certainly difficult to make sure that our products are moving within a timely fashion.
Yeah, and maybe it pulls more medicines into temperature control when you've got such fluctuations in climate in different parts of the world now, and the extremes are so big that where you typically wouldn't have temperature control on a certain product, actually it's needed because before the tolerance might cover it, or it needed very minimal, where they're getting moved onto different transportation types, and it's just pulling capacity in, I presume, as well. Maybe what you're seeing.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
Okay, so look, we're sort of getting slightly running out of time here. So I just wanted to sort of finish on what's the sort of thing that you maybe want listeners to take from today, and what's the last thing you'd like to get across to people listening?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for me is continuing to challenge the status quo. Right. We saw, like I mentioned before, we saw a lot of opportunity to challenge the status quo during COVID because a lot of regulations were eased. We're trying to get material moved. We're trying to get it manufactured. So there was a lot of easing of those restrictions within our industry. We have now gone back, right, to our old similar ways that we've always done it. So continuing to challenge the status quo, looking at what the outcome is for the patient at the end of the day, and trying to be the most efficient as possible. I think, like I said, we get stuck in this is how we've always done it. This is tried and true. But there's other opportunities I think still out there, and you can, by going to some of these conferences like Logia Pharma that I attended in 2025, You can see those opportunities are there. It's really changing the mindset of our industry, which is it's a big turn. We're driving a big cruise ship and we got to make a big turn. I think we can get there.
Yeah.
And then the other piece to it is just, I think, is remembering how critical logistics is to the industry. We're moving this material from our distributors to our final patients, or whether it's moving from our manufacturing hubs to different packaging facilities, making sure the material is staying within the cold environment that we intend it to be, and as well as safely, is really critical to the industry. And continuing to remember how critical global logistics is, but how often it's forgotten of how critical it is. So, it's really very much important to what makes this industry move.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. If people want to sort of speak to you or get in touch, are you speaking at any conferences this year? Have you got anything planned where you'll be out on the road and people can come listen to you talk?
I don't have anything currently planned for 2026 just because of our current manufacturing schedule within my current role. But 2027, looking at a couple different conferences that we'll be involved in.
Okay, brilliant. Look, Derek, thank you so much for coming on. That was a great conversation, and we covered a lot of information there. And I really appreciate your time and taking time to talk to us today.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the conversation. Really enjoyed it.
So you've been listening to Cold Chain Insights. My name's Thomas Hunt. Thank you for listening to this episode. We look forward to welcome you next week for our next guest. Thank you.